How's everybody doing? Having a little technical difficulties, but we gonna make it. We gonna make it. Just checking me. Okay, I'm live. You see the thumbnail? We're gonna talk about secure software development framework. Let me see. I like the other way better. Will move me around if I get in the way. Will move me around if I get in the way. So, you know how we do it. I'm tired, and it's just Tuesday. It's just Tuesday, but sometimes that's how it goes. Getting our NIST on today. Little GRC. Oh man, my back is killing me. Once again, we about to get started. I need some rest. I think I need a vacation. Getting on this grind. So I think we just gonna fall into it and get into it. Fall into it and get to it. You got any cybersecurity questions or tech questions? Just put them in the chat and we'll get to it. Like I said, I think I'm gonna fall in. I have to apologize for my slides a little bit. Office 365 is not letting me put that in presentation mode. So I think we're just gonna run it like that. Just add it to there and just keep it moving. So once again, you see it, GRC, NIST 800, 218. My monitor flicked a little bit. Just want to make sure I'm still online. Okay, I'm still there. What's up, casual economists? Let's get it. Yeah, we're about to get to it. I'm having a little minor problems with Office 365, so we're just gonna make it work. We're just gonna make it work like that. So, getting ready for Hump Day tomorrow. So once again, we're gonna talk about NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies. It's a federal compliance, rolling in the GRC. Secure software development is huge, right? We're going to talk a little bit about Devsecops, but from a GRC perspective, I just want to talk about how do you get from a presidential bulletin to security requirements for a company. So a lot of people always ask me is, what are the security requirements? How do you get them? How do you go through a policy? How do you go through NIST? So we kind of walk through that steps once again from a GRC perspective and just see kind of once again governance, risk, and compliance and see how that works, right? And that's really how I made my money in the last 10 years, more at GRC. So I think I'm gonna slide back over hopefully to engineering. So I don't know. I've been going back and forth. Like I said, GRC treats me well, and yeah, most people you give them requirements, then they go off. You don't really have production responsibilities, which is good sometimes, but production responsibilities sometimes, not sometimes, but they get paid, right? So let's get to rolling. Like I said, my fault. 0365 is not letting me put it in presentation mode for some reason. Let me just make that a tad bigger. So I got to check on my setup after the stream. We just gonna get through it and figure out what's going on with it, right? So, what is executive order? This is what Biden said. You can see it. It's executive order 14028. It was signed on May 12th, 2021, improving the nation's cybersecurity. Last week, we actually went over the high level of his strategic plan. So the president once again sets the strategic plan. Then NIST, FERPA, OSHA, all those other government agencies, right, set up the security off of the executive order. So we're just gonna peek at it real quick. I am on LinkedIn. I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat, casual economist. Yeah, I'm not a huge LinkedIn person to be honest. Shout out to Kev Tech, man. He the LinkedIn monster, textual chatter. What's up, MGTOW Universe? Those guys be linked in it. Keep it techies out there, Black Heights is out there. Those guys really be working their LinkedIn. I usually go through Indeed when I'm looking for a job. So I do a little LinkedIn. Every now and then I do post a YouTube video on my LinkedIn. I just don't use LinkedIn like that. But it's weird, like if I apply for a job or post a video, my LinkedIn shoots up. So but once again, we're going to talk about how to get from an executive order to security requirements, right? From a GRC perspective. So you see the executive order 14028. What's up, game over? Improving cybersecurity. This section one was policy. The United States faces persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns, right? This all the nation states, removing barriers to sharing threat information, modernizing federal government cybersecurity, enhancing software supply chain, establishing a cybersecurity review board. If you look at a strategic um, directions, right, that we went over, I think a couple weeks ago, a lot of that stuff came out of this order, right? So the president said this is what he wants. NIST, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, CIA, CISA, right? So they're all implementing his strategic plan from this to the executive order to actually building stuff, right? So once again, I'm having a minor problem with my Office 365. It won't let me go to preview mode for some reason. So we gonna just creep it through like this, right? And the other part of that executive order, I just want to touch on a little bit. Section 6 standards, the federal government playbook for responding to cybersecurity vulnerabilities and incidents, improving detection from cybersecurity vulnerabilities and incidents in the federal network, improving government investigation and remediation, national security systems, and general provisions. The real thing in there is his original executive order. He named out a zero trust, which is a framework. Usually don't see presidents talking about framework, even in technology. And here is they're real serious, obviously, about vulnerabilities and remediation, right? Because he actually named that in the executive order, which I thought was little telling. Usually they talk about it at a high level, right? Fix problems, don't let problems hang out. They actually name vulnerabilities, playbooks, right, and remediation, right? Trying to fix them. So once again, from a GRC perspective, and the president actually talking about that from a high level, right? So once again, super, I would say interesting. I'm kind of nerdy like that. So, and we talked last week about NIST 800R5, the secure software development. These are the security families, right? We're talking about how do you do a security program. We're not focusing on any technologies yet. So when you do a program, right, that's coming from the executives at high level. So these are the security and privacy controls from this 853, which is kind of national standard. So once again, IRS, OSHA, Homeland Security, most of them use this as the baseline, right? CMC picks and choose out of this for DoD. So when people talk about doing a security program, right, this is kind of what they start with. Most people in technology, I was talking about how do you secure a database? How do you secure your network? How do you secure the infrastructure? How do you take your network and secure it to the cloud, right? That's a program. If you're doing it in silos, right? Whatever your weakest link is, we're going to talk a little about risk, but you want to do a program because that's going to talk about your whole organization, your whole company. And it could be, and I talked about this, a micro company with less than 25 people and less than $500,000. They were calling that micro companies. As big as, I worked for Fortune 500 pharmaceutical companies, Department of Revenue agencies, state of Indiana, with 40,000 employees, right? So that's when you need a program, right? And that's when you start talking about making killer money because you're not focusing on one technology. You're talking about the direction of a company and how they move forward with their cybersecurity programs. Is it pertaining to development software or managing it? Both. A little of both, MGTOW. Because developing it and managing it, right? So managing it is really developers, you the CIO, what you're developing, how to secure it, right? Then part of the developing part in there is right because we're going to talk about a little bit about DevOps and a little about DevSecOps, right? Those are the two killer, I guess, job postings, right? So when we talk about the security family, programming actually is in our supply chain risk management. If you remember, Kaseya's, it got into their development life cycle. They packaged it up, then they pushed it out to federal agencies and private companies. So I think it was China. So they had their TPT in there, and it reached out. They were hacking companies because the supply chain was the software. So once they got pushed out to multiple customers, right, the bad guys got pushed out. Right, it wasn't just them. Once they wrapped it up, they start pushing it to the other company. Same thing with FireEye. FireEye was packaging it up, and I think they pushed some of their malware out to other companies because they provide services to other companies. So if they get hacked, any company that deals with them, right, is going to get hacked. So that's why the supply chain directive is so important, right? Because if you do something and you develop software that get pushed out to 500 or 600 companies, all right, you can crack the whole United States with a couple big companies. So in the supply chain, SR2, see, I put the SDLC. Like MGTOW say, we develop a plan for managing the supply chain risk, research and development, design, deliver, integration, operation, and maintenance. Review and update the supply chain risk management plan. Protect the supply chain risk management plan. And let me put me in the middle. If you see in the red, hopefully I didn't make that too little. Plan addresses managing, implementing, monitoring, controls and development and sustainment of system across the system development lifecycle to support mission and business functions, right? So I think that's the question MGTOW asked. So you go do a little everything. There was another part where SDLC, like this has the biggest one because once again, Kaseya's, when they pushed it out to the oil company, they got a bunch of people hacked in FireEye. When they pushed their software out, they got hacked. And a lot of people try to hide when they get hacked. They actually came out and said, "This is our issue. This is actually how you detect the hack." They had special red team tools that got stolen. So they told you if these red team tools were being used and how to track what they were doing. So I thought that was pretty cool. And actually it gave them more business because they were transparent. So the secure software development framework, we're going to start delving in there. The three big issues out of that NIST publication is, we talked a little bit about this, to reduce the number of vulnerabilities in your release software, to reduce the impact of exploited vulnerabilities, and to address the root cause of these vulnerabilities occurring in your application. Right. So they believe you're doing some kind of development. And once again, you're in people's supply chain and you're pushing your code out to different companies. So And I think that's the new thing. Nation states are starting to attack software development companies or SCADA companies where they can get um, malware and rootkits in PCs before you buy them, because most of the motherboards are built in China and other countries. So they get malware in those supply chains. So when they get them, they're already hacked. And so I think that's one reason they start focusing on the secure um, development framework. They're trying to get the supply chain tight before hackers get to it. Once again, a lot of times, Kaseya's, FireEye, you get malware in those packages and they get delivered to other companies. Then once again, they're in your network. Right now, they starting to go lateral movement. They start attacking you because one software vendor failed and their software is used a lot. Right. So that's why the government once again put up the secure software development framework. It used to be cycle. Now they want to create a framework, right? Because framework is something people can adopt and start using pretty immediate, right? So I think that's a good thing for them. Can y'all hear that sound? Let me know if y'all hear that sound, which is annoying. Let me see. I think my external drives. But you said we're gonna prepare their organization, prepare the software, produce well, secure software. We hope that sounds good. Then responsibilities once again for vulnerabilities, because anytime you create software, you're gonna make mistakes. There are gonna be vulnerabilities. Hopefully, you have your red team come in and test it. You have your internal team, and we're gonna talk about that. You should have a internal security team and security testers that test your software. To be honest, that's pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen it, right? I've heard people talk about it. I've seen people have small, minor security tests in there. The only time I've actually seen it is AWS and Azure. I looked at their system security plan in their back office. They show kind of their Devsecops. So that's probably the two biggest companies that I've seen that actually use it, right? So, which is everybody's trying to get there, everybody's working to it. So we're gonna prepare the organization, uh, talk about ensuring the people, process, and technologies prepared to perform a secure software development. The first goal is to ensure security requirements for software development are known by everyone involved in the SDLC license, which I've done a lot of these, and a lot of times programmers are not worried about security. They worry about features because that's how you get paid, right? You only worry about security when you get hacked, but a lot of times they're trying to put out features. You're trying to get your AI and your ML in the back end. You're trying to get whatever algorithms you use because that's what people pay for, right? Let's see. Let's see what that made out. Is this about? Yep, answer that. Okay. Or leave the sec testing to the developers. You can't leave it to the developers because they never do it well, MGTOW. Because once again, we're actually starting to push some DevSec in it, but you always have an external test team, MGTOW. Um, but you're right. Hopefully, you should do your unit test. We used to call it development unit test because you got to test your code at some level, even the security part. But now we're going to talk about this at DevSecOps at the end. You got your static automatic test, and you have your dynamic test with your FUD testing. DevSecOps, SecOps is when you build your software chain. DevSecOps is when you put security inside your development operations. So DevOps, your development operations, they figured out that they need security in there, right? Because the closer you get security to the planning part, because the longer you wait to put security into your software, the more it's going to cost, right? So that's development security operations. I do security, so I walk through with the developers and say, these are the security tests we need. We're doing HIPAA or IRS schisms, and the IRS and HIPAA tells you these are the security checks you need to do inside your software. Right then, on top of that, vulnerability scanning, because even though you build your software, you got a vulnerability in Tomcat or IIS if you're using Java, C Sharp. I'm an Oracle guy, PL SQL, so you got to keep updating those softwares from a vulnerability test, right? So you creating bugs in your software that have vulnerabilities, then the underlying infrastructure you use could have vulnerabilities, Shane. So you need security in there to be checking all parts of that, your infrastructure. And I got a few application checks in there. If you look at the OWASP top 10, SQL injection, command side scripting, cross site forgery, those OWASP top 10 been the same for like the last 20 years, but you need to be able to test that. Okay, what's exactly? But a lot of companies trying to cut corners. Yeah, you always cutting corners. Shout out to MGTOW until you get hacked and you get that big ass fine, MGTOW. Then what you gonna do? Because HIPAA they fine by negligent. So if you wasn't doing the OWASP top 10 or something simple, they could say you negligent. So it could be $1,000 a record. So if you got 1,000,000 records times 1,000, right? That's $1 billion. Right, so you got to make sure you get those in there. And you know, once again, you don't want to be seen negligent, because if you look at Equifax, they had half the United States money. They got called in front of Congress and they wasn't doing some basic stuff. So I think their fine was like $100 million. It was a crazy fine, so we will make sure we get those uh, in there, and you know how the requirements. So let's keep it. Of course, you want to implement roles and responsibilities. If you ever look at standard policies, the roles and responsibilities are in there, but you just want them laid out so everybody knows what they are. Like you need a DevSec, and how do you want your security organization working with your developers? And I've been having some uh, drop dead arguments with development teams, because a lot of times you messing up our our delivery schedule. That's too complicated. Do we need that much security? Right. So it's all in there. So you're gonna implement supporting tools. Shout out to my man. I think Maytel just talked about Burp Suite, which is definitely a tool I've used in the past that's in there. This allows you to use automation to reduce human error, define and use criteria for software checks. Right. So, and that's where once again automation come in. We're gonna talk a little bit about that coming up. Let's see. I use Burp Suite, yep, for automated tech. Yep, Postman. See, yep, Postman is super popular, especially with APIs. Everybody. I'm been working on my AWS credentials. They're big users of Postman. Every guy on YouTube that works for AWS is using Postman. So now, MGTOW, you right on. Especially with the Burp Suite, you can look at the variables when you hit the screen to check out what they are. Hopefully, if they're encrypted, you couldn't be able to read them. Um, Hidden fields that you can change. Hopefully, you're not using fields, you're using session on your database. But no, MGTOW, you got it. But like I said, Burst Sweep is definitely one of the programs I've used in past. Wasn't their head of security using I think so. I think it was like that, but I don't want to. I mean, there's a lot. I work with a lot of people. Once again, for those who don't know me, I'm Professor Black Ops. I've been in IT for 32 years. I've been in cybersecurity for 16. I've done everything from programming to database admin to web admin to application admin. I did Oracle and Java for, I've done Oracle for 20 years. I've done Java off and on for 10. So that's kind of usually my hammer. I usually do Java, which they use frameworks on top of frameworks. Most people use Spring and Hibernate. Object gets saved in a database as an object read out in those frameworks. So what you need to make sure those frameworks doesn't have vulnerabilities, right? So protect the software. This means protecting all aspects of your software from unauthorized access to tampering. The biggest source of vulnerabilities for any piece of software be insecure coding practices found in secure code. That's where the OWASP top 10 comes in. Secure coding practices include monitoring for leaked secrets. A lot of people be putting stuff in Git and source code. And they be having secret keys in there from the air date from their AWS passwords, right? Or hard coded passwords and code that they put in a public forum, right? So um, most of those public forums now are actually scanning for code because they're tired to get blamed for hard coded passwords and AWS secret keys. Verify software integrity through the use of cryptographic hash. Continue to examine your software after release for bugs and security vulnerabilities, right? So a lot of times is like Casillas, the hacker got the code and injected an extra 200 or 300 lines in there. So if the developer would have hashed it, put that hash in there, if the hacker would have added those 500 lines, when you checked it into your source code, those hashes wouldn't match, right? Because when you hash it for 300 lines, that's going to be a code. When you add in, if you add a period or one character, the hash is going to change. So that's why they're trying to get you to do that software integrity. A lot of times when you go to open source, they give you the hash when you download it. They said it's the hash. So if you download it and once you rehash it, if it's something different, somebody's tampered with it. I always say, well, hell, if I can get to your code, I'm gonna change the hash to my hack version of the hash, right? But there's different ways to check that. Then two is when you check in, they want the developers to have certain keys so you can figure out their code they checked and hash it, right? Because if that developer checked in some code that they usually don't fix or is in a different branch, right? That could cause somebody to check it and make sure it was him adding to the code and not the bad guy, right? Because a lot of times, bad guy takes over your PC, steals your credentials, and impersonates you. But if they impersonate you and they're working on a different code base than you normally work on, right? That will be a red flag that you should go check that code out, right? So once again, at the end, we got kind of a software development. I got a playlist too. I'm gonna show you where I was doing Devsecops. If you want to look at some other videos touching that, I got a playlist. I think I did 4 videos on that because when I switch over to engineering, I'm hoping to go to Devsecops. So or torrent magnet like Fortune 5. No, facts, me. Facts. So uh producing section 3, producing well software, design and develop to produce secure software, addressing security issue during the design phase, right? The closer you get your security requirements in the design phase, the cheaper it is. Because if you're trying to do it right before production or add something to it, right, you got to test it. It might not work with your database. It might not work with the current keys you're using. You might be trying to do something on-prem and we're in AWS or Azure. So you want to get those in design phase so you can have all those issues worked out. Then once again, section 1, you want your whole development life cycle to understand what that security requirement is and what does that look like, right? So we talk about handling security. You want everybody to know what it is. The software should be reviewed to ensure it meets your security requirements. A lot of people do peer reviews. That's super, especially now, John. This should be done by your in-house security experts. A lot of companies, especially medium to small, they don't have a security expert, right? It's like, oh, architect or whoever, DevOps, pick up security. You should make plans to reuse work and secure coding rather than rewrite stuff from scratch. You should make sure to configure your compilations, interpret, and build process to ensure good executable security. And we talk a lot about that. When you compile it, you got static and dynamic code testers. So when you compile it, ensure good security. When you check it in, you should have a security suite running on the back, like you're doing, like MGTOW. So you checking your functionality. Is this calculation right? Are you saving the names in the proper place, or are you validating what you need to validate? Are you still using Selenium or JUnit, whatever you're using? Right? You could put your security code test in there too. So once you get your functionality in there, the next part should be security. And once again, you want to try to get it in design phase because the earlier you start talking about security requirements, and a lot of companies struggle with what is a security requirement. We're reporting to Department of Homeland Security. What is their security requirements for a product we're trying to sell? Are we trying to sell a hospital? What are HIPAA security requirements? Right? A lot of people struggle with that, especially small. Once again, they got the features, but what is the security part of that? So I know a lot of people reach out to me when they're trying to do a startup or get some or try to get Series A or funding. Right, they reach out to me and we'll talk about, okay, what area are you trying to specialize? What domain are you trying to sell? A little federal, state? Or you just Graham Leach Bliley if you're doing some financial stuff, right? So there's there's always a government agency depending on what area of business you're in, right? So my job is to I kind of assist small companies with that, kind of my give back sometimes. So producing well secure software, that's the goal. You need to review human readable code to find vulnerabilities. That's where your peer review comes. One good way is to perform a manual code review. So when I code, usually we code our modules, and a lot of times we, which I hate it. It's been a while. It's probably since a decade since I code, so I'm sure it changed. We're actually winning code review, and people will look over your code and ask you questions. And usually you have the senior guys in there and your architect, right, looking at different code modules. Now, because we had a small team, I think we had 11, but I mean, people got thousands of coders and hundreds. It's hard to look at manual, right? But if you got a small enough team or you break your team out into small components, you'll look at that. You need to test your executable code to find vulnerabilities. That can be done using software tools, using such as dynamic application or static. Once again, I did Java. We had a find bugs, and PMD was two open source things. A lot of times in your IDE, they have bug validators in your IDE. So as you're doing them in your IDE, you can run those, like you said, those executable software tools. You need to configure your software to have secure settings by default. When designing what the default settings of your application are, you need to ensure the software will default to secure configurations after installation. A lot of times when you install software, especially AWS was bad about it, they would fail open. So the S3 bucket, people put stuff in there, it would be open up to the internet, and people could go there right to their database, just steal all their information, right? Because it was default open to the internet. So now AWS is cool. They're like, no, it's not open up to the internet. You have to do it, and they give you like, are you sure you want to do it? Are you positive? Right? Are you sure? Right? So that's the defaults being more secure to help smaller companies and not mature programmers. As a senior guy, to look those up, but sometimes you're a medium company, your developers might not be as sophisticated as they need to be to do that, right? So section 4, when you find vulnerabilities, we're going to respond to them. NIST recommends that you identify and confirm vulnerabilities in your application on an ongoing basis. You need to have means for assessing, prioritizing, and remediating the vulnerabilities in your software. If you have several vulnerabilities in your software, you need to have a means to prioritize most severe vulnerabilities. And we're going to look at how to do that. Fixing vulnerabilities fixing a vulnerability may not necessarily fix the root cause of the issue. It's important to identify the root cause for each vulnerability, right? So that's what we call it, the root cause. So anytime we find a vulnerability in our software, what caused it? Was it the web server, app server? Sometimes the memory could be bad. It could be the OS. What caused that vulnerability? Then how can we make sure we check for that vulnerability so it doesn't happen in the future? For small companies, what are some commercial open source packages that enforce security and coding? I know SonarQube is one of them. I got a slide at the end that points to two or three of those, MGTOW. Once again, open source. I'm a Java guy, so you got PMD and find bugs for Java. That's what we use. IBM had the big one. I think it was AppSec from IBM was huge. If you had money, that's one of the most commercial ones. Once again, I got a slide at the end that talks about three of those in a DevSecOps diagram, MGTOW. Once again, sorry about that. For some reason, Office 365 it says I can't put it in preview presentation mode. So we're just gonna go old school and make it work. Part of the framework, and I'll put this in the. I think it's in the description. They give you a nice grid, and it walks through each one of those four things we had at the top. Prepare the organization. So it says define the security requirements for software. That's PO1. And a lot of companies struggle with that. What does that mean? What are we? Who are we reporting to? Once again, is it a HIPAA thing? How do we define the security requirements? A lot of people do best practices, but sometimes they miss security requirements. Ensure that the security requirements for the software development are known at the time so they can be taken into account throughout the system development lifecycle, and duplication of effort can be minimized because the requirements of information can be collected once and stored. All right. So once again, where are those security requirements? Identify and document all the security requirements for the organizational software. Development infrastructure and process. Example, define the policies and software development infrastructure, the components, including development endpoints throughout the cycle. Define the policies for secure development process. Review and update requirements at least annually or sooner if there is a new requirement. Educate effective individuals on the pending changes, right? Once again, you want to get those software security requirements up to the people so they can start doing them. And I put another grid in there real quick. Protect software. Protect our forms of code from unauthorized access and tampering. Help prevent unauthorized changes to code, both inadvertently and intentional. If you go to the next grid, store all forms of code, including source code, executable code, configuration as code based on principle of least privileges, so that only authorized personnel, tools, and services have access. An example over there, store all your source code and configuration code in the code repository. Most people use Git for that. Restrict access based on the nature of our code. For example, open source code intended for public access may need its integrity and availability protected. Other code may also need confidential protected. Right. So once again, these are getting your security requirements together. We're going to touch on a little bit this at the end of what that would actually look like. Right. So the requirement is store all forms of code, including source code, executable code, configuration code, JavaScript. All that code needs to be in configuration management. Right. So we can make sure it's secure. And here's the DevSecOps in there. And this is the question MGTOW asked me. So that's AWS. So you check it in their code pipeline, you committed it builds at the bottom, which I need to make that bigger. They had dependency check. I think MGTOW brought up Sonar Cube. I'm looking back in it. So they show Sonar Cube and OWASP. They had OWASP app. So as you check it into your build, it's going to run those scans. And this is PHP code. So they got PHP scan, but you can sub those out for any of your vulnerability scanners. So as soon as you check the code in, you're going to get a report of what's up, Wilton? How are you doing? MGTOW, that shows you your scan. It's got Sonar Cube, dependency check, PHP scan, and dynamic code analysis, which is OWASP Zap, blah blah. So once again, that's DevSecOps. You check your code in, it runs your security checks there. that checks get put in the S3 bucket so people can review them. Sometimes when you check it in, you have lambda controls. Some of that code and scan gets put in the AWS Security Hub. That's the hub for all your security controls, vulnerabilities. It actually scans your infrastructure. CloudWatch is their login. Parameter stores, like we talk about, you don't want to have passwords and AWS keys. They get put in parameter store. And as your code gets run, it pulls those secret keys and IDs out of parameter store. So they're not buried in the code, right? And to get in parameter store, your code needs certain integrity checks and code. And for you to see it as a person, right, you got to get in your AWS password, keys, probably MFA to get in there. You would need MFA. So this is just a high level one. I'll show you. I have Devsecops videos if you want to go check those out. It drills down. We're just talking at a high level from requirements. Now we got our requirements. We talked about repository. Those are repository code. And there they have manual approval. So before you put it in Elastic Beanstalk stage and Elastic Beanstalk production, right, all that's automated, you would have to go through a manual approval. You build it, you check it, then you say we're good, then it'll build it in the staging, and once it passed staging, it'll put it in production, right? And once again, if you check out my page, I do have DevSecOps videos at a high level, drilling down into that and talking about that. So once again, I get a lot of people asking me. I'm glad Gabe's not here. Gabe beat me up, man, if I was talking about Stiggs to Gabe. Shout out to Gabe. He might check the replay. But Stiggs is just security requirements, right? Application security and development. This is what I used to do when we were in DOD. If you look, there's 32 highs, 232 mediums, 22 lows. So what's that? About 270 application checks, right? So we give this to our development teams. Some of those are scanned, but a lot of times I like to print those out and give those to the architect and the lead developers so they go through there as we meet so they're comfortable with what those checks are. And we're about to look at, I think, one of those checks so you can see what those look like. But two is, since you got high, medium, lows, that tells you the risk of your application, right? If you got 32 Cat 1s and all your 32 Cat 1s have vulnerabilities, that means those are in the wild and they're being attacked. So they're high risk and high impact, right? So if you have a bunch of these, we should say ATO authority operate, we're sending your stuff back to development, right? Quick story, I never forget this. I'm gonna have the guy on there. He was the lead. We have 400 programmers in 5 states. We put all our code together. We had to build it manually, and I was building some of them. We put it in production. I think the first week we had 10,000 errors. So they told everybody, y'all need to get back on it and fix all those errors before we go. You need to do a better job of testing. Shout out to MGTOW, right? So we had to get our developer unit test in, and we had an integration test, and we call it EIT, Enterprise Integration Test, because you have 5 states coming together, right? So once again, that's testing. These are your application security checks. Once again, it was 470 of those that you have to look over. Then make sure you secure. Once again, these are DOD level checks. So let's look at one of the checks. The application must execute without excessive account permissions. The application are often designed to utilize a user account. The account represent means to control application permission and access to the OS. Application resources are both. When the application is designed and installed, care must be taken not to assign access privilege. Because a lot of times I see this done on a lot of developers. You have an account that has all your code, your tables, and they just give it admin privileges, right? So if somebody hacks that account, they have admin privileges. They can get on the box. A lot of times the admin privilege too gives access to the user that's inserted into the database, right? So you need to have 2 or 3 different users. So if a hacker got the Java code, they wouldn't have the privilege to be able to insert into the database. right? The database is where all your social security numbers and bank accounts are. So even if they get the application, they wouldn't be able to see the user and password in a certain database. 'Cause remember, it was in that parameter store, right? So the app can run it, but then parameter store is going to give it to the user. So if the hacker just gets one of those, they wouldn't be able to get the username and password in the database if you're using separate users for least privilege. But most people are lazy and it's hard sometimes. So they just get one user, give it admin. So when the nation state get that one user count with admin, right, they could do anything they want. And what we in a bad spot, right? We getting called into the president's office because we got hacked, right? So once again, that was the Devsecops code commit. We're building. Once we building and we deploy it. Once we deploy it and then staging or production. Once again, shout out to MGTOW, dependency check, SonarQube, PHP stand, and dynamic. That's OWASP Zap, right? So you can pull those out for more commercial or open source. Those are the ones they were just using in this demo inside AWS, right? I was labbing every day, so I used to build stuff like this in my labs, right? So I can get better, right, in anything. So that's pretty much it. So I just want to talk more from a GRC. Um, Governance risk, once again, is you need to be able to tell your development staff. Shout out to MGTOW is what are their security requirements, right? A lot of people like, what does that mean, right? So my job is to say, here's your security requirements. And we looked at the STIGs, right? We had high, medium, and low. So as we go through and we start getting this information back, we can start doing analytics, right, of what the risk is to your application. If you got a lot of high impact, high risk in your application, right? That's a high. Once again, the risk to your company is high that you're going to get hacked, right? Then the governance is kind of what we're talking about now. How do you govern on how they're going to do the security requirements? Once again, we're going to do the risk, and the compliance is, are we talking FERPA for education? Everybody's familiar with HIPAA, health and hospitals, one of that. NIST is pretty big if you're in the federal space, FedRAMP, right? And I've done videos. Um, I did a large compliance and I named like 20 compliances, right? So even if you're a developer or a DBA, if you understand some of those compliances and how they work for your job, right, that's going to put you at SME level. You can say, I'm a DBA and I can make this database HIPAA compliant, right? You're taking your domain skills as a DBA. Now you understand the compliance and you're putting those together. And I promise you, a lot of people struggle with that. Once they see it, if they're a good DBA, they can pick it up. But once again, they don't know what those requirements are. They don't know what makes a database HIPAA, or shout out to MGTOW, what makes a program HIPAA compliant, right? I showed you the 470 checks, right? I just showed you one, but once you go through there, you can understand what makes a program, Java, C Sharp, whatever that is, DoD compliant, right? So let me drop the link. I got to get ready for hump day tomorrow. I'm struggling. Got to get it together. Once again, just on my little GRC, and like I said, we looked at, because a lot of people like, why is the president writing orders? We kind of talked about those orders roll up to be security requirements. Those orders is what CISA puts into play, Department of Homeland Security, right? When they see these sections, right? Homeland Security says, okay, this is what the president wants us to focus on, right? CISA, TSA is in charge of, which I think is weird, is charge of CASES, which is the pipeline, right? So you're gonna have physical security, automation, uh, programming, all that's under security, right? Be that physical or computers, right, or cyber, right? All that, those executive orders roll up into security requirements, right? So the president works with his big time staff and they come up with these, right? The president doesn't know a lot about security, but it rolls up into those once again security requirements. Because um, I work with a lot of shout out to MGTOW small companies, and they don't really understand. Okay, we got a product, we understand it, but what does that mean for security? Right then, what domain are you in? Are you in state police, FERPA education? A lot of people do HIPAA. A lot of people doing Fitbit and stuff. Check your heart, right? Because a lot of times you really want to take those products into the hospital, right? Because then they get government funding. They buy your software for a crazy amount of money, but then your software would need to be HIPAA compliant. Then what does that mean to your development staff? What does that mean for MGTOW Universe, right? So when you say security, what does that mean for Weldon? What does that mean for Shane? Shane, let me know if I answered your question, if you're still on. I think I did. I've been rambling. I'm tired. Shout out to casual economists. But at a high level, that's what it is. I want to, like I say, talk more of it from a GRC compliance and a risk perspective. I think once again that's a hidden gem. A lot of people. So what does that mean? That means I work with the development teams, the DBA, the infrastructure guy. Once again, what requirements are we doing? What security films are we doing? Who are we trying to sell this to? If we sell it to the government, what agency are we reporting to? Right. And then from an internal standpoint, because they're going to do a risk assessment. Let me go back there. When you sell to big companies, and I do this a lot, is the company who you selling your software to, your product, or even internally, you got to do a risk assessment to make sure their software is not vulnerable to get you in trouble, right? So what does that mean, right? So you check in their policies and procedures, their incident response. One thing I always come up: is there a breach? How long does it take you to to report that breach to them? That's real big. And I'm always in meetings with lawyers, which surprised me to no end as I get older, right? So from a legal perspective, T's and C's, terms and conditions. If somebody's selling software and you needed to report to HIPAA, you got to do a risk assessment to make sure their software is HIPAA compliant. Even if they tell you it's HIPAA compliant, you need to double check that so you're not negligent. If they get hacked and you did no assessment, right, that will make you negligent. So that's one reason you're in a room with lawyers. So what's the fine gonna look like? What's the requirement? Depending on how big the firm is, you might trying to get discounts. A lot of times, their security requirements inside the application you're buying. So you got to make sure if they meet yours, or you put more, or if there's something you don't agree on or disagree, what can you do as a mitigating control so you can use their software? A lot of times the president like, I want this software. So you got to figure out how to get that software approved for internal use. So um like I said, that's it. I just want to do that NIST 800 218. Let me click on that. Once again, I do federal work, so I'm always reading these NIST special publications. So I was looking into that. So I was like, oh, I just think I'm gonna do a quick video on that because that's stuff a lot of people don't really talk about a lot. Combo courses, he talks about that a lot. I think that's really only federal guy I know. I think Simply Cyber talks about it as a whole, but I don't think he drills down into specifically federal work. So that's something I'm going to do a little more of. I think that's a hidden gem. So I think that's all I got tonight, fellas. I want to do something quick. I'm glad y'all joined me. I got to figure out if I'm going to go back to doing Sundays. I just been tired lately. So figure out what we're gonna do this Sunday class on. But I'm gonna do a little NIST, GRC. Once again, I do my TAM well. I do women in Linux. I look at salaries a little bit. They're real big on the salaries. Shout out to them. They're always doing that good work over there. And Once again, everybody have a good hump day. It's coming up. I'm a little behind at work, so I need to get at it. I've just been struggling a little bit. 2023, it's been a long year for me. I apologize for the young, but I'm out. Everybody have a nice night. I'll talk to everybody, and I'm gonna see you in these YouTube streets. Back down. PBO back now. You'll see me. Especially, I think definitely Tuesday at 10. It's gonna be. I think game over. Somebody said that. PBO at night. It's gonna be my little night show. So we'll do different things. We'll do a little NIST. We'll talk about just cybersecurity in general. I'll probably talk about that more. I think a lot of people like to hear my stories and my predictions of the future. So we'll do that a little more too. And two, if y'all want me to look at something special, just drop it in. So once again, I'm out. I appreciate everybody. Have a good night. PBO tired. Happy hump day. It's tomorrow.